Why is Goblin Piledriver never sad? Because he has protection from the blues.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. I'm also sponsored by Face to Face Games, Canada's premier Magic the Gathering store. Using the promo code MTGMudsta will get you 5% off site-wide, with eligible orders getting free shipping Canada-wide. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome to the first bonus episode in December. If you're new to the channel, during December I post extra videos on Saturdays as a way to give back for supporting me throughout the year. Today's game was filmed in my studio space, with Seb playing his Jodah the Unifier deck. He keeps Beledros, Temple Garden, Bard class, Steam Vents, Renari Merchant of Marvels, Plains, and a Godless Shrine. Max is playing Araumi of the Dead Tide, keeping Disallow, Ravenous Chupacabra, Floating Dream Zubera, Barren Moor, Gaia Reach Sanitarium, Swamp, and Prismatic Vista. I am playing Miirym, keeping the Great Henge, Leyline Tyrant, Windswept Heath, Frostboil Snarl, Sarkhan's Triumph, Scaled Nurturer, and a Snow-Covered Forest. Felix is playing his Tevesh Szat Ludevic deck again, keeping Exalted Flamer of Tzitz, Chromatic Lantern, Gaedron Dyada, Blasphemous Act, 2 Swamps, and an Island. Seb wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a tap Steam Vents. Max draws, playing Evolving Wilds and cracking it for an island. I play a Frostboil Snarl but have no land to reveal for it, and it comes in tapped. Felix draws, playing a Swamp. Seb shocks into Temple Garden on his turn, and pays a green and a red for a Bard class. Max plays a Prismatic Vista after drawing, cracking it for a Swamp. And then casts a Floating Dream Zubera. He passes after that. I draw and play a Snow-Covered Forest. I then tap 2 for a Scaled Nurturer and ship the turn. Felix draws, plays a Mountain, and passes. Seb plays a Shockland for turn with a tap called the Shrine coming in. He then levels up the Bard class and passes after that. Max draws and plays a Swamp. He's got enough for Araumi, casting her and passing. I draw and play a Snow-Covered Mountain. I then use the Scaled Nurturer to help cast Leyline Tyrant, gaining 2 life. I pass to Felix after that. Felix draws and plays an island. He then casts half of his commanders, with Ludevic joining the fray. Seb draws and casts Jodah thanks to his discount on Bard class. He then plays a Misty Rainforest, cracking it to go and find a breeding pool. It comes in tapped, and he passes after that. Max draws and plays Gaia Reach Sanitarium. Going to combat, he pokes me for 1 with the Zubera. In his second main phase, he casts Crucible of Worlds and passes after that. I draw and play a Windswept Heath. I cast an Arcane Signet and go to combat. I swing my Leyline Tyrant at Seb, dealing 4. I pass after that. Felix draws and plays a Swamp. He casts a Chromatic Lantern and passes. At this point, I save some time by cracking the Windswept Heath to go and find a Sheltered Thicket. Seb draws and plays Renari Merchant of Marvels. He then cascades from Jodah into Rivaz of the Claw. Once that's done, he plays a Flooded Strand, cracking it for a Watery Grave. Moving to combat, he gets to swing Jodah at Max for 9, who connects, and once that's done, passes turn. During the end step, Max cycles a Barren Moor to draw a card. Max draws and casts a Ravenous Chupacabra, which enters and blows up Jodah. He then plays Evolving Wilds from his graveyard thanks to the Crucible, sacrificing it for an island. Going to combat, he pokes me again for 1 with the Zubera. After that, Max gets to draw from Ludevic on his end step, and I float 2 red mana to keep on the Leyline Tyrant before moving to my turn. I draw for turn, and in my main phase cast the Great Henge. I then go to combat and smack Seb for 4 with the Leyline Tyrant again, and pass after that. Felix draws, and casts Giadron Giada. He upticks her to drain us each for 2, and puts a corruption counter onto Rivaz. He passes after that. Seb draws, and plays a mountain. He casts his Sibinic Signet, and then goes to combat. He gets some revenge by swinging Rivaz at me for 4, and passes after that. Max draws and plays a Sunken Hollow, which comes in untapped. He then plays a Repository Scab, exploiting his Zubera to draw a card, but doesn't have an instant or sorcery to get back. Max then activates Araumi to encore Zubera, and then goes to combat. He swings 1 token apiece at each of his opponents, and Felix and Seb block while I take the 1. With the Zuberas dying, Max gets to draw 6 cards. He then moves to his end step, and Max has to sacrifice the last Zubera to draw 4 more. He then has to discard down to hand size, and passes. While I gain 2 life with the Great Henge on his end step, tapping it for mana, and cast Sarkhan's Triumph, going to find Klauth. I draw, and play a Snow-Covered Mountain. I then cast Miirym, drawing a card, and putting a +1/+1 counter onto it from the Great Henge. Moving to combat, I hit Max for 4 with the Leyline Tyrant. During my end step, I get to draw a card from Ludevic, and pass. Felix draws and casts his other commander, Tevesh Szat, and then downticks Giadron to gain control of Araumi. He then upticks Tevesh, sacrificing Araumi and drawing 3. He finally finds a land at this point, playing a Smoldering Marsh. After that, he passes, and during his end step, Seb flashes in Dragonlord Dromoka. Seb draws and recasts Jodah. Going to combat, he swings Dragonlord Dromoka at me, dealing 10 and gaining 10. He then plays a Wooded Foothills, sacrificing it and losing 1 to go and find a tapped Overgrown Tomb. He passes after that. Max draws and plays a Shipwrecked Marsh. He then casts a Dark Ritual and pays 8 to cast an Archon of Cruelty, targeting Seb with the trigger as it enters. Seb responds by flashing in Rith and cascades off of Jodah. He reveals until he hits Kyodai, Soul of Kamigawa. Seb then loses 3, sacrifices Rivaz, and discards a card, while Max does kind of the opposite, gaining 3 and drawing a card. After that, Max passes, while I float another red mana and keep it on the Tyrant. I draw and cast Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, copying Miirym and triggering the Great Henge. This lets me draw a card, and I follow that up by playing Flooded Strand, sacrificing it for a Snow-Covered Island. I then cast Klauth and get 2 token copies thanks to my Miiryms. Going to combat, I swing 24 points of damage at Seb and gain 72 mana from my 3 copies of Klauth. Seb blocks Miirym with Rith and the original Klauth of Kyodai, which eats them both but still takes 12. In my post-combat main phase, I then use my approximately 1 billion mana to cast a Molten Echoes, naming dragons. I then recast Miirym. I follow this up with a Valakut Awakening, putting my whole hand on the bottom, then drawing that many +1. I then cast Ganex, making 2 permanent copies of it, +1 temporary one off the Molten Echoes, and making a bunch of treasure tokens. I then Ghostly Flicker Ganax and the Leyline Tyrant, making even more treasures. I then play out a Reckless Barbarian, making a bunch more copies of it, and a ton of treasures, not to mention drawing more cards. I then drop a Terror of the Peaks, getting 2 permanent copies and 1 temporary one. I then dump my hand worth of dragons, drawing more cards off the Great Henge and making more treasures from my Ganaxes, and proceed to blast everyone in the face for lethal and win the game. Game review time! So we've got another 4 bonus videos coming up for the rest of this month, and if you haven't already seen it, I've been releasing shorts on Sunday, either focusing on fun cards, budget options, or short top 4 lists that I've come up with. Speaking of short, this was a pretty quick game as I finished it off around turn 7 or turn 8. I know that Miirym is a very powerful commander and a lot of people roll their eyes at him, but I still love the deck. I'll probably just play it less. The main reason I built this entire thing was just to make token copies of Terror of the Peaks, and in this game I got to do a lot of that. We got to see some pretty sweet new tech from Max's Araumi deck with those Uberas. I'd never really given them much thought outside of Pauper, but seeing it in action with Encore really got me thinking. In one turn, the blue Zubera drew him almost 11 cards, and the black one I think makes people discard cards, which could completely gut someone's hand. We also didn't get to see as much of Felix's Ludevic and Tevesh Szat deck, although we know what it does. He did at least get to steal some commanders and sacrifice them to draw some cards, but he seemed to be so far behind in lands that he really just couldn't do anything per turn except for cast 1 commander and pass. I also think I missed a lot of the Ludevic draw triggers. This is probably the second time that you've seen Seb's Jodah the Unifier deck, and it's basically his Dragon / Golos deck, but with a new commander. It works pretty well since you get to cascade into more legendary dragons every time you cast one, and that Bard class did some fantastic work. Reducing the cost of most of his dragons by a red and a green, of which there are many, saved him a ton of mana. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.